Right now, Allison Riggs, the Democrat, leads by 734 votes. The votes that are being challenged, if all of them were thrown out, there's a possibility that vote total could swing toward Griffin.
Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. This is everything you need to know about politics and public policy in North Carolina. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. This week on the Debrief, we have, of course, David Larson, managing editor of Carolina Journal. We're going to be talking a lot about what's happening in your state government, plus the courts have been really busy. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation is here to give us an update on all the lawsuits that we've been following, still some from COVID, elections boards, so much going on. But first, you remember Congressional District 1, one of the closely watched races in the 2024 election? Someone has already declared for Congressional District 1 for 2026, right?
2026.
All right, tell us what's going on.
The primaries are starting to begin to take shape for a lot of these races. And Sandy Roberson, who is the Rocky Mount mayor, I don't know if he's still the Rocky Mount mayor, but he has been at a time.
That was when there was like two Sandys in the last primary.
Yes, there are two Robersons and two Sandys.
Right. Yeah, complicated.
But he ran in 2022 and narrowly lost to Sandy Smith. I think it was like, let's see, I wrote down 31 to 27.
Right.
So Sandy Smith eked by that,
that threshold.
Yeah, the threshold to not have a runoff. But yeah, so she ended up losing by 5, and then 2024 he didn't run, and Lori Buckhout, she was a closer race.
Sure.
And so now he's jumping in early, and Lori Buckhout has already endorsed him and said he'd be great. And so the reason I thought this was noteworthy, it seemed like because it is a swing district, but it's also a rural district.
Right.
It's important to kind of wrap up the Trump loyalists, but then also because it's so close. Of a district, you also kind of have to have appeal to independent and moderate voters that are probably going to decide. Because Don Davis does a good job at that, I think, for a Democrat in a rural area in the South. He puts himself out there as more of a swing voter, a moderate, and he's been able to hold on to that district.
Sure.
I think Sandy Roberson, it seems like they're trying to gather around him already.
Sure.
By having the last Republican nominee already endorse him, and he's already put $2 million of his own money in. So I think he maybe will be able to thread that needle. In his announcement, he said a lot about, I'm going to work with Trump. So he's going to try to thread that needle of energizing the Trump-loving base while appearing, it's sort of established enough to pull in those independent and moderate voters. So I think that'll be an interesting one to watch if a bunch of other people jump in. Like last time he ran in 2022, there was a ton of people, so nobody really got too far past that threshold. Sandy Smith got like 1%.
Sure, and Lori Buckhout did pretty well against him. She's actually, I think, now working in the Trump administration.
She lost only by 2 compared to Sandy Smith losing by 5.
Right.
But I do think, with this kind of a attack, if he can hold those two things in balance a little better than the last two Republican candidates, I think they probably have a pretty good shot. Unless often what you see in midterms, the person in power, it'll kind of depend on how Trump's approval ratings continue. I think a lot during midterms, if a president's not popular, it can.
A year. I feel like people's memory is about a year. Are you surprised to see everybody jumping in already on Trump coattails?
No, I think a couple of things to note about this. One, David's already alluded to this, but I think one of the reasons you have the announcement now is to try to clear the field. Say, hey, I'm getting in this race. I'm putting in a bunch of my own money. Stay out, everyone else. Unlike what he faced when he ran in 2022, and there were so many people, and a candidate was able to win with about 31% of the vote. So getting in now discourages other people. That doesn't mean others won't try to get the nomination, but it discourages them from getting in. The other thing is, if you are running for Congress for the first time, not as an incumbent, having some sort of base of support can be helpful, and having been the mayor of Rocky Mount should be helpful in that district. It's not something that guarantees that you can win, but that's a place where, at least in that district, the people who are in Rocky Mount definitely know your name, know about your record, and so that should be helpful for him as he's trying to move forward.
Sure.
I was just going to add too, for those who aren't familiar with North Carolina's congressional districts, almost all of them are not as competitive, and North Carolina's 1st Congressional District is the only
Yes.
true toss-up.
Sure.
And it actually was the only competitive race, the only swing district in the entire Southeast.
Was it really?
Yeah, last
Wow.
election. That's what the crystal ball people, they're saying that it's, they're the only one. So that's why it's one that we're looking at so carefully.
Sure.
It's out of the congressional races, this is the one that people, it won't be a foregone conclusion what's going to happen.
Right,
basically.
maybe again in 2026. But going back to 2024, there's still one race in the entire country that has not been certified. And it's, of course, right here in North Carolina. Again, give us an update on Riggs, Jefferson, Griffin.
So basically right now what has happened is the state courts have, to this point, completed their work on this. The state Supreme Court issued a ruling and said that the 60,000 plus voters who were being challenged because they had incomplete voter registration records, all of those votes are going to count. They're not in jeopardy. But 2 other categories of voters that Jefferson Griffin challenged are still up in the air. One is the overseas and military voters who didn't provide photo ID.
Okay.
That number is somewhere between 1,400
Okay.
if it's only Guilford County, which is the group that Griffin had protested by the time protests were due.
Okay.
But it could be as high as 5,500 or more, depending on what courts determine, because he had challenged some other counties as well during the course of the process, and so it depends on what is determined about how many could actually be challenged.
Sure.
And then there's the second group that's several hundred voters, 260 some are in the court documents. There could be some more, but it's going to be in the low hundreds of never residents, people who checked a box on a form that said they've never lived in North Carolina, never lived in the United States.
Okay.
And so there's been some discussion since then that some of these people may actually have lived North Carolina and have lived in North Carolina in the past, filled that out incorrectly. Be that as it may, they checked the box saying they've never lived in the United States, and so the courts have said throw those votes out.
Okay.
The state Supreme Court has decided what it wants to have done on that. Now it's in the hands of the federal courts. U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers basically said, allow this state court process to play out while I'm dealing with Allison Riggs and the State Board of Elections concerns about this process. But then this week, the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals stepped in and said, no, this ballot curing process for the voters that I was talking about earlier,
Sure.
that's on hold until Myers decides whether federal issues would block it from happening. So that was...
Which would benefit who? Do we know?
So right now, Allison Riggs, the Democrat, leads by 734 votes.
Okay.
The votes that are being challenged, if all of them were thrown out, there's a possibility that the vote total could swing toward Griffin.
Right.
But that likelihood gets much less and less if the number of votes that have to be cured or thrown out gets smaller.
Okay.
So one of the challenges, and this is also something that's still up in the air, is just how many votes will be affected. The State Board of Elections has said no more than 1,675 votes, because
Okay.
they're saying only Guilford County, overseas, no photo ID votes, and then 266 of the never residents, but some of them, they're going to go through a process and make sure they are actually never residents, which
Okay.
is not something that the court said that they could do. So that's another bone of contention. But that's really going to be the determining factor here, is just how many votes actually get to go through this process, if any.
Sure.
And if the number is small, then that number makes it much less likely that the election could flip from Riggs, the Democrat, to Griffin, the Republican.
Yeah, sure. This is getting a lot of national attention. Do you think that this is drawing so much attention because it's not going to flip the court? Why do you think this is getting so much attention nationally?
I think maybe the process
Sure.
element to it, because
Sure.
the Democrat National Committee has articles on
They're
it,
so
and
focused on it,
they're very
yeah.
focused on it. There's billboards everywhere. I think it can seem like a topic that could reflect negatively on
Right.
maybe Republicans have this big majority already, and it seems, based on the rules that were in place, that they lost this, but they
Right.
want to. Democrats maybe want to portray it like they're trying to steal an election and,
Right,
and that
right.
kind of a thing. So, from that angle, I think that's why it gets
Yeah.
a lot of attention. But also, I mean, it is an important race.
Yeah, it is.
the Democrats are down big on, was it 7-2 or
it's 5-2, right?
5-2, sorry.
Yeah.
But they're going to try to claw that back, and if they
years,
can't,
yeah, of course.
take this race, then it will be a longer journey to do that. So I think they really want to make sure that if they feel they want a race, then they get to hold on to that. I guess Allison Riggs does get to continue hearing cases in the meantime, so maybe it won't have affected her job in that sense, her position, but. It also does go to show that every vote can count.
Every vote counts. That's exactly right.
7 votes per county. About
right. That's about right.
Yeah.
Now, Governor Stein's talking about election law and process too. There's another lawsuit.
Yes. After Governor Stein won the election last fall, one of the things that the General Assembly did was in a bill called Senate Bill 372. I can't remember the 372. I think it's something like that. This was the bill that they took Hurricane Helene relief and combined it with a bunch of structural changes to government. Then Governor Roy Cooper and then incoming Governor Josh Stein, who's continuing this, have 3 active lawsuits against the changes in that bill. One of them was the latest attempt to change the State Board of Elections, moving the Board of Elections under the control of State Auditor Dave Bolick. Another one challenged a piece of the law that would block Stein from appointing a new commander to the Highway Patrol. And then another one would block the governor or take away one of the governor's appointments to the Utilities Commission and also force him, if there's a judicial vacancy, a statewide judicial vacancy, to replace the outgoing person with someone of the same political party recommended by people from the party. Right now, the governor, when there's a judicial vacancy, can appoint anyone he wants. So the latest development on those various suits was this week, a 3-judge panel hearing the Elections Board case not only decided on a temporary basis that Governor Stein could win, they actually ended the case. They said, because he was asking for a preliminary injunction, and they said, no, we're not giving a preliminary injunction. We're ruling summary judgment in your favor, which means the case is over, no trial, you win. And so basically, this was a 3-judge panel, 2 Republicans and a Democrat. One of the Republicans and the Democrat ruled for Stein. The other Republican would have ruled for the General Assembly. And the argument was that the General Assembly could not take away control over the State Board of Elections from the governor because he has the ultimate executive power, and that means that he has to have the power to control an administrative agency. The argument from the General Assembly, which the dissenting judge went along with, was no, that's not what the law says. The law says you can't take the power away from the executive branch. They moved this to Auditor Bolick, who is part of the executive branch. And so this Bolick, who would have had power over the Board of Elections starting May 1st without any court action, he's already said he's going to appeal. We just saw via social media that State House Speaker Destin Hall says they're going to appeal. So this is likely to get to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court will decide this issue of whether the General Assembly, if it shifts power from the governor to another member of the executive branch, another member of the Council of State, is that constitutional or not? Because that would have an impact not only for this case, but it also would have an impact on the Utilities Commission case, where they're giving an appointment from the governor to the state treasurer, who's also a member of the Council of State. It could have an impact on some other boards and commissions that have been up for grabs, where the General Assembly has taken some appointments that were in the governor's hands and given them to other members of the Council of State. All of this is likely to be decided at some point by the state Supreme Court, which is another reason why those state Supreme Courts are so seats are so important.
There was another one about COVID, a COVID protester. This is something, if you can remember back, when everything was shut down, we were under a state of emergency. People couldn't, stand close to each other in the grocery store. You were doing, pickups everywhere. There was a group of protesters outside the executive mansion, protesting the state of emergency, protesting the state lockdown, and some were arrested. Well, some of these suits she's now suing, right?
Right. So after this original Reopen NC protest that happened in April of 2020, not long after the lockdown orders, there was a protest. The law enforcement said it's time to disperse. Everyone left.
Right.
One woman stayed to get photos and or video, at least photos, of people leaving.
Right.
And so they said, okay, it's time for you to leave. And she said, well, my ride just left. Because I told him to leave because I was getting pictures of people leaving.
I did not realize that that's why she stayed.
Yes, she stayed because she gave her keys to her stepson to drive away because she was getting photos of people driving away. They said, well, it's time to leave. I said, my ride just drove away. They arrested her. And she was charged with violating the executive order to stay home and also with trespass. And the criminal process stretched out for 3 years. So finally, eventually, the charges were dropped and she took community service and her record was clean. But after that 3-year process, she sued, first in federal court, lost in federal court, but also then after that ruling, sued in state court. And the ruling this week that came out was that the complaint will be dismissed against the governor, head of the Department of Public Safety, one of the state law enforcement agencies. None of them can be charged, and the Wake County DA, but she can continue with the suit against the state, against the city, against some of the city police officers, and some of the state law enforcement officers who were involved in this whole process.
Right, and this suit is not about the lockdown itself. This is about her arrest that day of the reopen NC.
Exactly. It's all about her, the treatment of her after that protest where she was arrested and the prosecution continued. And part of the argument was, and you actually, if you see the court complaint, there's a picture of former Governor Roy Cooper wearing his mask from when he was in the George Floyd protest. And part of the argument is, look, you allowed all of these people to do the exact same thing for other causes other than this complaint about the shutdown. And I was treated unfairly, and she'll be allowed to continue that argument, but some of the defendants have been dropped.
Sure. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing on the George Floyd, because the George Floyd protests were about a month after she was arrested. So a lot of her case is about free speech and about equal protection, and the city wants to say that she was just arrested for more of a process thing of disobeying, and whereas she's saying, that people were being treated very differently, including the governor himself.
No kidding, yes.
So I do think that's, this case is going to be allowed to go forward, so that'll be interesting to watch, because, there does seem to be a little bit of a double standard there to allow. She was standing by herself in a parking lot.
Waiting for a ride.
And then other people are, no social distance and even vandalizing things, and that was sort of winked at less than a month, or about a month later.
And part of our argument also is that there was a conspiracy among these law enforcement officials to do this, that they didn't really like this idea of the protest, they didn't want people to be there, and so she said that they were looking for a scapegoat, someone that they could arrest so that other people wouldn't do this again.
Right.
Because remember, this was around the time when people were really starting to get aggravated about these shutdown orders, and the sense was that they're going to come out and protest quite a bit until these orders get reversed. And so she found some documents and some communication that suggested that perhaps some of these law enforcement officers were looking to make some sort of statement by arresting someone. And she said, it was me, I'm the victim.
Right.
And that's why she sued.
Interesting, because they wanted to prevent this from being a daily, weekly occurrence of reopen NC.
That's at least the argument, that the idea was if you arrest someone, that would send a message, and others would say, well, I may not like it, but I'm not going to mess with getting arrested.
Interesting. All right, we're going to be following all of these stories and all the updates on these lawsuits as they proceed through North Carolina courts. Please make sure you check out carolinajournal.com and leave a comment below. We want to know what you think about some of these cases. Did you go out there and protest? What do you think about what these arguments are saying, and about the Board of Elections and the executive branch, the separation of powers? I want to hear from you and continue that conversation. And good news as we head out, North Carolina is now the 4th best state for economic growth. The American Legislative Exchange Council puts out a rich states, poor states report every year, and that was good news for North Carolina. We're at number 4, so that's promising as we go into the summer. Thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you soon. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.